The front desk clerk tapped her keyboard, squinted at the screen, and finally admitted my name wasn't on any of the bookings. I had driven 4 hours through the Smokies with a bottle of wine on the passenger seat and a mental image of my family laughing together on a mountain balcony. Instead, I was standing in a cedar-scented lobby, phone pressed to my ear, listening to my mother laugh on the other end of the line as she told me she thought I'd figure it out. I'd arrived at the lodge around 3 in the afternoon. The October leaves were doing exactly what the travel brochures promised, exploding in shades of red and gold against a sky so blue it looked painted. I'd taken the winding route through the mountains, windows cracked, country radio playing low, feeling for the first time in months like I was moving towards something warm instead of running from something cold. But the warmth I was chasing was an illusion. My name is Rosalind Mercer. I'm 32 years old, and I've spent my entire adult life proving I belong to a family that has never quite saved me a seat at the table. I worked as a financial research director in Charlotte. I built a career from scratch after putting myself through the University of Tennessee on an academic scholarship. I spent those college years shelving books in the library for 17 hours a week while my sister Catherine had her tuition handed to her by our grandfather without ever having to ask. I graduated summa cum laude, and the only person in the audience who screamed my name loud enough to make the dean flinch was my roommate Nadine. Catherine, meanwhile, dropped out of business school after 1 semester because she found the professors uninspiring. She married Derek Hale at 28, had a son named Liam at 31, and hadn't held a job in 7 years. My parents never mentioned the difference. They never had to. In our family, the roles had been assigned long ago. Catherine was the one who needed protecting. I was the one who could handle anything on my own. The strongest chains are the ones you don't realize you're wearing. The family trip had been my mother's idea. She called me in August, her voice bright as she described a gorgeous mountain lodge in Gatlinburg with a fireplace and a pool right on the main strip. "We're all going," she said, as if the details would simply arrange themselves. I asked about rooms. She assured me my father had handled the reservations. I texted him that night, asking if I was in room 2 or 3. He replied an hour later with a vague promise. "All set. Don't worry." I read it, set the phone down, and chose to believe him. It's strange, the things we choose to believe because the alternative is too painful to hold in our hands. People have asked me since then why I didn't call the lodge myself, why I didn't double-check. The answer is simple. I shouldn't have had to. When your father says it's handled, you trust it. You don't question it because questioning it means admitting that trust might be misplaced. And I'd spent 32 years convincing myself that if I just showed up enough, if I just drove the 4 hours often enough, I would finally earn the place I'd been trying to claim. I packed carefully for the trip. Hiking boots, a novel I'd been saving for months, and a bottle of Malbec I planned to share with my mother on the balcony after dinner. In my mind, I'd already scripted the weekend. Catherine and me on a trail with little Liam between us, his small hand reaching for colorful leaves. My father reading on the porch. My mother ordering too much food at a restaurant while all of us laughed about nothing in particular. I packed my car early Friday morning, the wine bottle riding shotgun like an old friend along for the ride. The drive itself was breathtaking. I came west on the interstate and cut south through the Smokies, the October foliage performing exactly as promised. Red maples, golden hickories, birches so bright they seemed lit from within. I had the windows down and the music low, and I let myself feel, just for a moment, that I was heading towards something rather than away from everything. When I pulled into the lodge parking lot, the building was exactly what I'd expected. A big timber frame structure with rocking chairs on a wraparound porch and a stone chimney already spilling wood smoke into the crisp mountain air. I grabbed my suitcase and walked through the double doors into a lobby that smelled like cinnamon and cedar. It was the kind of place designed to make you feel at home, warm and inviting, a refuge from the cold. The clerk at the front desk was young, maybe 23, with a name tag that read Alyssa. She smiled when I stepped up. "Checking in?" I gave her my name. She typed, scrolled, typed again. Her smile faded into something more careful, more hesitant. I have 2 rooms under Mercer, she said slowly. Richard and Carol Mercer in room 214. Catherine and Derek Hale in room 216. There's no single reservation under your name. I stared at the screen she'd angled toward me. 2 rooms. My parents in one. My sister, her husband, and their 4-year-old son in the other. My name, nowhere. Is anything else available? I asked. She checked her system and shook her head. We're sold out, ma'am. Peak leaf season. We've been booked for months. I stood there with my suitcase handle in one hand and my phone in the other, and I called my mother. She picked up on the 4th ring, laughing at something Catherine was saying in the background. I told her the problem, and she paused, the way she always does when she's calculating how much confusion to project. Oh, honey, she said brightly, I thought you'd sorted out. You always do. Sometimes the people who know you best, know you least. Behind her, I could hear Catherine asking Derek whether the pool was heated. And in that moment, I understood something I'd been avoiding for years. This wasn't a mistake. Forgetting comes with a gasp and a scramble to fix it. This came with a laugh. It was a choice dressed up as an oversight. I was still standing at the front desk when the lobby doors swung open and a child's voice echoed off the timber rafters. Catherine walked in wearing new boots and a quilted vest, Derek behind her carrying duffel bags, Liam running ahead toward the fireplace. She saw me at the counter and stopped. Not the way you stop when you're surprised. The way you stop when you're deciding how to play a scene. What's the problem? She said loud enough that a family checking in at the other end of the counter turned to look. I told her there was no room for me. She shifted Liam to her hip and glanced at Derek, then back at me, her voice carrying clean across that lobby. We reserved rooms for me, my husband, and my child. We're the real family. She said it the way you'd explain a seating chart to a caterer. Derek smirked, a small tilt of his mouth that signaled agreement without ever having to claim it. My mother adjusted her purse strap and studied the stone floor like it might offer an escape route. My father stood 6 feet away, scrolling through his phone, present in body and absent in every way that mattered. Other families were watching now. A woman with 2 teenagers. An older couple by the fireplace. The clerk whose hand had frozen over her keyboard. I stood there with my suitcase handle in my right hand and a 4-hour drive settling deep into my bones. And my sister's words hung in that cedar-scented air like smoke from the chimney, visible, sharp, impossible to unsee. I didn't count the seconds. I didn't measure my options. I just stood still for a moment while the lobby held its breath. Then I picked up my suitcase. Then I'll leave. I said it quietly, flat, the way I'd read a number in a board meeting. No quiver. No tears. I turned and walked through the lobby, past the stone fireplace where Liam was stacking brochures, past the family with the teenagers who looked away when I passed, past the rocking chairs on the porch, and down the steps to the parking lot. Behind me, the lobby doors opened and my mother's voice cut across the gravel. Rosalind, don't be dramatic. We can figure something out. I didn't turn around. I set my suitcase in the trunk, got in the car, started the engine, and pulled out of the lot with my mother's figure shrinking in my rearview mirror, her arms at her sides, her mouth still open, standing on the porch of a lodge that had room for everyone except me. The Malbec was still on the passenger seat, unopened, the label reading like a promise that would never be kept. I didn't care about the wine anymore. I just drove. Route 441 north through Gatlinburg was narrow and tourist-choked in October, and I drove it with my hands locked at 10 and 2 and my phone buzzing on the center console like a trapped insect. Mom. Catherine. Dad. Mom again. Catherine again. I didn't answer. I didn't glance at the screen. I kept my eyes on the road and my foot steady, and I drove 20 miles north to Sevierville where the tourist strip thinned out and the river grew quieter and the mountains stopped performing for an audience. The river bent and sat back from the road behind a row of sycamores. A two-story place with white paint going soft at the edges and a hand-lettered sign near the office door. I pulled in, parked, and walked inside. A woman behind the counter, maybe 60, glasses on a chain, looked up from a paperback. "Just you, hun?" "Just me." She gave me room 7, ground floor at the back of the building, a window facing the Little Pigeon River. $89 a night. I carried my suitcase across a gravel path and unlocked the door and set my bag on a bed with a quilt that smelled like lavender dryer sheets. Through the window, I could hear the river and nothing else. By the time I sat down on the edge of that bed, I had 34 missed calls. I didn't count them right away. I knew because my phone showed the number on the lock screen, stacked up like a receipt for something no one had paid for. $89. That's what it would have cost my parents to book a third room. They spent $1,300 on 2 rooms and couldn't find $89 more for a daughter who had driven 4 hours to be with them. The ceiling fan in room 7 had a wobble. Every third rotation, it ticked against something, a screw or a bracket, soft and steady like a metronome keeping time for a song nobody was playing. I sat on the bed and opened my phone. 12 texts from my mother, sent in a sequence that mapped her emotional arc with the precision of a stock chart. First, "This is ridiculous." Then, "You're ruining the trip." Then, "Call me back right now." Then, "Catherine is upset." And finally, 20 minutes after the last one, "Fine, be that way." I scrolled through them twice, looking for something specific. Not an apology. I knew better than that. I was looking for awareness. A sentence that acknowledged what had happened. Something like, "We should have booked your room." Or, "Catherine shouldn't have said that." There was nothing. Not one line in 12 messages that placed the weight anywhere except on me. On my leaving, my drama, my refusal to come back and absorb what they'd done with a smile. I set the phone face down on the nightstand. I opened the bottle of Malbec I'd planned to share with my mother on a balcony that was never mine. I poured a glass into a paper cup from the bathroom. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed and listened to that ceiling fan tick and drank wine alone in a room that cost less than my sister's new boots. The river outside kept moving in the dark. It didn't care about any of this. That was the most comforting thing I'd heard all day. But the texts weren't the worst part. That came the next morning. I sat in that room listening to the ceiling fan while my phone lit up like a switchboard. 34 missed calls. Not one of them was an apology. If you've ever been the person your family calls to come back but never calls to say they're sorry, you know exactly how that pillow felt that night. What they did next made walking out look like the easy part. I should tell you about Christmas 3 years before the lodge. I drove 4 hours from Charlotte in an ice storm. The interstate through the gorge at Asheville was down to 1 lane, salt trucks every half mile, my windshield wipers fighting a losing war against freezing rain. I made it to my parents' house in Knoxville by early afternoon and carried in 4 individually wrapped gifts I'd spent a month choosing. A cashmere scarf for my mother in the shade of blue she always pointed out in catalogs. A fishing reel for my father because his old one had seized up at the lake. A Build-A-Bear firefighter for Liam because he'd been obsessed with fire trucks. And a leather-bound journal for Catherine because she'd mentioned wanting to start writing again. We opened presents around the tree. Catherine went first. She always went first. My parents gave her a diamond tennis bracelet. Full production, the velvet box, the gasp, the way my mother held Catherine's wrist up to the light so it caught the afternoon sun through the living room window. Derek filmed it on his phone. Then Catherine turned to me and handed me a candle. Vanilla. Still in the drugstore bag. I turned it over in my hand and read the clearance sticker on the bottom. $4.99. My mother saw me looking. "I didn't know what you'd want." She said it brightly, like not knowing your daughter was a reasonable defense for a $5 candle sitting next to a diamond bracelet. I said thank you. I smiled. I drove 4 hours home the next day with that candle on the passenger seat. I never burned it. It sits on the shelf in my apartment behind a row of books where I don't have to look at it, but I always know it's there. Then there was Catherine's wedding 2 years before the lodge. Nashville. Big venue. 200 guests. A string quartet played pichelbel while Catherine walked down an aisle lined with white peonies. I was not in the bridal party. Catherine told me in March, 6 months before the ceremony, and she said it gently, the way you deliver bad news to someone you don't respect enough to be honest with. We didn't want to burden you with bridesmaid costs. The dress was $280. I'd priced it. I could have covered it from one day's pay. But Catherine chose her college friend Megan as maid of honor and 2 of Derek's cousins as bridesmaids. I sat in the back row between an elderly neighbor and a man I later learned was Derek's accountant. Nobody told me about the rehearsal dinner until the day before. I found out from a text in the family group chat that started mid-conversation, as if I'd been included all along and simply hadn't been paying attention. But I was the one who arrived at the venue at 7 in the morning to help set up. I carried folding tables from a storage room across a gravel lot. I arranged 200 centerpieces, mason jars with wildflowers, each one requiring a ribbon tied in a specific knot Catherine had demonstrated once via FaceTime. I stayed after the reception and cleaned until midnight. Stacked chairs. Swept the dance floor. Loaded gifts into Derek's brother's truck. Derek's brother, slightly drunk, leaning against the tailgate, looked at me and grinned. So, you're the hired help? He was joking. It didn't feel like a joke. I drove back to Charlotte the next morning. No thank you text. Not that day. Not ever. Morning at the inn. Light came through the window in a long stripe across the bed, and the river outside sounded louder than it had the night before, swollen from whatever rain had fallen while I slept. I sat against the headboard with my phone and scrolled through my photo library. I found the family photos. There were maybe 50 across the last 5 years. Birthdays, holidays, posed shots on porches and in front of Christmas trees. I was in 3 of them. In 2, I was partially cut off at the edge of the frame, half a shoulder and a slice of jaw, as if whoever held the camera had framed the picture around Catherine and then caught me by accident. I opened the family group chat and scrolled back 6 months. My name appeared less than anyone's. And when it did, it arrived attached to a task. Rosalind, can you bring the extra chairs from storage? Rosalind, can you pick up Liam's prescription on your way? Rosalind, can you grab ice? Never, Rosalind, how are you? Never, Rosalind, we missed you. Never, Rosalind, are you okay? I sat with the phone in my lap and looked at the data the way I would at work. Patterns. Frequencies. Outliers. This wasn't forgetfulness. Forgetfulness is random. This was structured. I was included when labor was needed and excluded when belonging was distributed. And the system was so old and so consistent that everyone in it, including me, had stopped noticing it was a system at all. I was the emergency contact for a family that wouldn't contact me in an emergency. I called Nadine at noon. She picked up on the second ring. She always does. I heard hospital noise behind her, the beeping and overhead pages that meant she was on a break at the medical center in Asheville. Talk to me, she said, because Nadine doesn't waste time on hellos. I told her everything. The 2 rooms. Catherine's voice in the lobby. My mother chasing me to the parking lot, not to apologize, but to call me dramatic. The 34 missed calls that added up to exactly 0 acknowledgements of what went wrong. Nadine listened the way she always listens, which is to say completely, without interrupting, until the silence on the line told her I was done. Then she said, When are you going to stop driving 4 hours to prove you belong to people who won't save you a chair? She wasn't being cruel. Nadine doesn't do cruel. She was being accurate. And accuracy doesn't leave you anywhere to hide. I sat on the bed in room 7 of the Riverbend Inn with the phone pressed to my ear and the river running behind the window, and I didn't say anything for a long time. I don't know, I finally said. That's the problem, Roz. You do know. You just haven't said it out loud yet. After we hung up, I opened the Notes app on my phone and typed a heading, Things I Need versus Things I Accept. The need column filled fast. Respect. Inclusion. A room with my name on it. A family that noticed when I wasn't in the photograph. The accept column filled faster. The candle. The back row. The cleanup. The vague texts. The missing reservation. The lobby. The lobby. The lobby. Sunday morning. The family group chat lit up. Catherine posted a selfie from the lodge pool. Sunglasses. Liam on a float behind her. Mountains in the background. The water that perfect unreal turquoise. Family time in the mountains, she captioned it, followed by a string of heart emojis. My mother hearted it immediately. My father gave it a thumbs up. Derek posted a photo from a hiking trail, Liam on his shoulders, mist in the trees, captioned, Making Memories. My mother hearted that one too. I scrolled through the photos and the reactions and the follow-up messages. That trail looks amazing. Liam is getting so big. Best trip ever. And my name appeared nowhere. Not my name. Not my absence. Not a single message that acknowledged a daughter and sister had driven 4 hours, been told she wasn't real family, and left. I had been erased so completely that the eraser itself left no mark. My phone buzzed with a separate text. Cousin Denise, my grandfather Arthur's niece's daughter, a year older than me, lives in Maryville outside Knoxville. Are you on that trip? I don't see you in any of the photos. I stared at the message. I typed I left, deleted it, typed long story, sent it. Denise replied fast. You okay? I looked at her reply on my screen and thought about the honest answer, which was no, and the answer that would keep things manageable, which was something shorter. Getting there, I typed. Denise sent back a single heart. No commentary. No follow-up questions she knew I wasn't ready for. Just presence. Small and specific, from a corner of my family I'd never thought to lean on. Monday morning. I was standing at the window of room 7, watching a heron pick its way along the shallow edge of the Little Pigeon River, when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Text from my father. I picked it up, expecting something logistical. Maybe they'd left something at the lodge. Maybe they needed me to call someone. Maybe the trip had ended early. Instead, Mom says you can share Kay's room if you come back. We shouldn't book 2 rooms for someone who doesn't even bring anyone. I read it. I read it again. I set the phone on the windowsill and looked at the heron, which had gone still. One leg raised, waiting for a fish. My father had been given the opportunity to apologize, to acknowledge what Catherine had said in the lobby, to offer something that resembled regret. And instead he had reduced me to a head count. Not, we're sorry. Not, we should have planned better. Not, Catherine was out of line. My worth, 32 years of scholarships and 60-hour weeks and 4-hour drives and 200 centerpieces and a summa cum laude degree nobody clapped for, measured by whether I had a husband or a child to fill the other bed. Someone who doesn't even bring anyone. I picked up the phone and took a screenshot. Then I set it face down on the nightstand and stood at that window watching the heron until it caught its fish and flew. I didn't delete the text. I didn't respond to it. I kept it the way I kept the candle, not to look at, but to remember that I wasn't making this up. That the evidence existed. That the numbers didn't lie even when the family did. I walked along the river behind the inn that afternoon. The October air had turned cooler, carrying the smell of wet leaves and chimney smoke from somewhere upstream. The little pigeon ran shallow over flat rocks, and I followed a dirt path that wound between sycamores, hands in my jacket pockets, letting myself think clearly for the first time since the lobby. I didn't want an apology anymore. That realization arrived quietly, without drama, the way important things usually do. An apology from my mother would come wrapped in conditions. An apology from Catherine would come with a revision of events. An apology from my father would come 3 weeks late and addressed to the wrong injury. And any apology from any of them would do the same thing apologies had always done in my family. Reset the clock. Put me back at the starting line. Give me permission to drive 4 hours again and set up the chairs and buy the gifts and stand at the edge of the photograph and wait for the next lobby. I was done. Not with anger. Anger requires energy I'd already spent. Not with revenge. Revenge requires caring about the outcome. Done the way you close a ledger that never balanced and never will because the numbers were wrong from the beginning and no amount of recalculating changes the inputs. I would stop driving 4 hours. Stop volunteering for setup and cleanup. Stop answering calls from people who never once called to ask how I was doing. I would build my life from the materials I already had, the job, the apartment, Nadine, the coffee at 5:45, and I would stop carrying lumber to a house that didn't have a room for me. My phone rang. Not family. Grandpa Arthur. The man my father had insulted with a text about head counts. Someone who doesn't even bring anyone. My father typed those words and hit send. He didn't call them back. He didn't add, I didn't mean it. If someone in your family ever made your worth conditional, not on what you've built, not on who you are, but on who stands beside you, then you already know why I stopped walking back. What happened at Thanksgiving changed everything. Arthur Mercer, my grandfather, was 82 years old and lived alone in a house on Norris Lake about 30 miles north of Knoxville. He'd been alone since my grandmother Dorothy died in 2016, and he'd stayed in that house because the lake was where he fished and the house was where he'd built the life he wanted. Arthur Mercer did not leave places just because they got quiet. I'd expected to visit him after the Gatlinburg trip. I always did. Always drove the extra half hour from Knoxville to sit on his porch and drink his coffee and listen to him talk about walleye and weather. He'd expected me too. Where are you, Rosie? His voice was the same as always, gravel and patience, the voice of a man who'd spent 50 years giving orders on job sites and had learned that volume matters less than timing. I made coffee. I told him the basics. The 2 rooms. The lobby. The drive to Sevierville. No embellishment. Arthur doesn't respond to embellishment. He responds to information. When I finished, there was a long silence, and behind it, I could hear the grandfather clock in his living room, the one Dorothy bought at an estate sale in 1978 and he'd never let anyone move. Your grandmother would have left too, he said. He didn't say more than that.